Recently, Christian B, as he's known under German privacy rules, was released from prison at the end sentence. 2 weeks on, he arrived to confront the prosecutor, who says he was Madeleine McCann's but doesn't have enough to charge him.
Actually, I'm not feeling free. I still have this ankle track, and I'm followed by police. Ja, ist richtig. Ich war bei der Staatsanwaltschaft.
I was at the public prosecutor's office because I wanted to speak to Mr. Wolters.
McCann was 3 when she vanished on a family holiday in Portugal 18 years ago. The prosecutor says drifter Christian B, a convicted child sex attacker, abducted and Madeleine, though he's never questioned him about her.
£14 million of taxpayer money vanished into thin air. Multiple British prime ministers intervened, and the latest suspect, a notorious predator, is currently hiding out in the snowy forests of Germany. 19 years have passed since that terrifying night in Praia da Luz, yet the truth about Madeleine's disappearance hasn't come to light. Instead, it has been buried under a thick fog of power, money, and some of the most ruthless media manipulation in history. This is no longer a simple missing persons case. It is a massive institutional cover-up. What happened next would ignite a fire of rage in everyone who heard the story. 19 years after the world's most infamous vanishing act, the global media machine desperately needed fresh meat. They found it in Christian Bruckner. For the last 6 years, British and German tabloids have relentlessly plastered his face across front pages, painting him as the ultimate boogeyman, the definitive answer to a nearly 2-decade-old nightmare. The narrative was packaged perfectly for mass consumption. A notorious, deeply disturbed drifter who happened to be living a transient lifestyle in a camper van near Praia da Luz at the exact right time. It was a neat, terrifying bow tied around an impossible case. But if you strip away the sensationalist headlines, the explosive broadcast specials, and the sheer deafening volume of speculative noise, you are left with a chilling, undeniable void of actual proof. The German Federal Criminal Police Office, BKA, has confidently paraded him as their prime suspect, treating his guilt as a foregone conclusion in press conferences. Yet, after millions of euros spent, properties excavated, and years of supposedly rigorous investigation, they have never produced a single shred of concrete, forensic evidence to formally charge him with this specific crime. No DNA, no verifiable CCTV, no physical link placing him inside that ground floor apartment on the night of May 3rd. Recently, the carefully constructed narrative began to fracture even further when Bruckner was quietly acquitted of several unrelated predatory charges. Today, this supposed criminal mastermind is living an isolated, heavily surveilled existence, reportedly holed up in a gazebo in a freezing German forest, tracked around the clock by undercover officers. The sheer absurdity of this modern media circus becomes even more apparent when you look at the raw correspondence from the suspect himself. In letters sent directly from prison to German and British journalists, Bruckner expressed the frustration of a man crushed by a predetermined narrative. That is,
I'm not feeling free. I still have this ankle track, and I'm followed by police. Ja, ist richtig. Ich war bei der Staatsanwaltschaft.
I was at the public prosecutor's office because I wanted to speak to Mr. Wolters.
Ich wollte ihn bitten,
I wanted to ask them to stop this witch hunt against me and give me my life back.
mir mein Leben zurückzugeben. Ja, mir wurde ausgerichtet.
I was told that Mr. Wolters couldn't be bothered to speak to me and that I should leave the building.
Ich soll doch dann irgendwie das Gebäude wieder verlassen.
now nobody is arguing that Bruckner is a saint. His criminal past is undeniably dark, and he is a dangerous individual. But I gotta be honest with you, when you actually sit down and analyze his verified behavioral patterns, the pieces just do not fit. You look at his established victim profile, which historically ranges strictly from 17 to 80 years old, to suddenly pivot and force him into the psychological profile of a predator who meticulously targets and vanishes a 3-year-old toddler without a trace, is statistically and behaviorally jarring. It feels less like a legitimate breakthrough in criminal profiling, and much more like a desperate orchestrated attempt by a failing justice system to find a convenient scapegoat. They needed anyone to take the fall to finally close the book, justify the wasted millions, and appease an exhausted, demanding public. The relentless media bombardment had everyone staring blindly at the man in the camper van, completely distracted from the real mechanics of the investigation. But what no one knew, behind this frantic effort to pin the blame on Bruckner, an entirely different, massive political machine was quietly pulling the strings in the shadows. But the media circus surrounding Christian Bruckner didn't just manifest out of thin air. It was the byproduct of a machine that had been set into motion years earlier, orchestrated by people operating at the highest echelons of power. Let's step back from the snowy forests of Germany and look at the absolute absurdity of how this case was handled from day one. In May 2007, the UK government was in a state of chaotic transition. Tony Blair was on his way out. Gordon Brown was stepping in, and the administration was being battered by a relentless storm of negative financial and political press. They desperately needed a distraction. And then, a beautiful blonde 3-year-old middle-class girl vanished from a holiday resort in Portugal. To the political elite, this wasn't just a devastating family emergency. It was an unprecedented opportunity. If that sounds like a wild, deeply cynical conspiracy theory, you need to listen to the explosive, on-the-record statements from someone who was actually inside the system. Former British Ambassador Craig Murray laid it out with chilling clarity during a highly revealing media interview. Journalist, was the response to the McCann case different from normal British diplomatic procedures? The British diplomatic staff in Portugal were under direct instructions from Number 10 to support the McCanns far beyond the usual consular assistance. It was New Labour's perfect photogenic tragedy, used brilliantly to bury bad news. Perfect photogenic tragedy. Let those horrifying words sink in for a second. While local Portuguese detectives were scrambling to secure a heavily compromised crime scene, 10 Downing Street was busy treating the disappearance of a toddler like a political campaign that needed urgent crisis management. To ensure the narrative stayed strictly controlled, the government didn't just send standard consular support, they deployed Clarence Mitchell. This wasn't a family friend or a grief counselor. Mitchell was a heavyweight political spin doctor, the former head of the government's media monitoring unit, pulling in a massive £70,000 taxpayer-funded salary. He had previously been brought in to manage the media optics for monumental national crises. Suddenly, this high-ranking political operative was flown out to act as the personal spokesperson for a couple of doctors from Leicestershire, heavily policing what they said, where they went, and how the global public perceived them. I gotta be honest with you, this part really makes my blood boil when you realize how the system actually works. If an ordinary working-class family loses a child abroad, they might get a sympathetic phone call from the embassy and a list of local lawyers. The McCanns got the full, unbridled power of the British state, meticulously crafting an untouchable global image. They were shielded by a taxpayer-funded PR fortress that actively alienated the Portuguese police, treating the local investigators not as allies, but as a PR liability to be managed and discredited whenever they dare to ask tough, necessary questions. It forces you to ask a very dark, uncomfortable question. Why on earth would a family desperately searching for their missing daughter need a professional political PR machine to heavily sanitize their media presence instead of focusing all their raw, unfiltered energy on working directly with the local detectives? Drop your take in the comments. Am I missing something? But because Jerry and Kate McCann were wealthy, well-connected British doctors, the system built a fortress of sympathy around them. Instead of facing harsh, immediate legal scrutiny for their undeniable negligence, they were treated like untouchable royalty. They flew on private netjets, secured a highly publicized audience with the Pope, and were photographed playing tennis and going jogging in the days following their daughter's horrifying disappearance. But the baffling. We have the official interrogation transcripts from the police files, and reading them is absolutely blood-chilling. According to the records, Kate was asked a series of 46 core fundamental questions about the crime scene and the night Madeleine vanished. Instead of cooperating, the official transcript reveals this devastating exchange. Investigator, did you touch any of the window blinds or clothes before the police arrived? Did you search the apartment thoroughly? Kate McCann, I refuse to answer. Investigator, are you aware that refusing to answer these questions is damaging the search for your daughter? I will not answer. A mother, sitting in a police station being directly warned that her silence is actively harming the desperate search for her missing 3-year-old child, and she still chooses to say absolutely nothing. She hides behind legal status rather than clearing up the chaotic timeline of a contaminated crime scene. It is a level of calculated self-preservation that is incredibly hard to comprehend. If you appreciate us digging into these official court documents and exposing the uncomfortable facts that mainstream media tries to gloss over, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Your support is the only thing that allows this channel to keep bringing you the unfiltered fact-based truth. The refusal to answer those 40... Let's talk about the price tag of this orchestrated media spectacle. When the local Portuguese police were effectively sidelined and their credibility publicly dismantled, the British government stepped in to launch Operation Grange in 2011. This was heavily promoted as the definitive elite task force that would cut through the noise and finally uncover the truth. Instead, it became one of the most controversial, financially draining bureaucratic black holes in the history of modern British policing. To date, this single missing persons investigation has consumed over £14 million of public taxpayer money. £14 million. And for what exactly? For nearly 2 decades of chasing ghosts, pursuing agonizingly vague dead-end leads, and endlessly analyzing speculative theories that have yielded absolutely no tangible results. When you actually look at how that massive budget is being utilized today, it is incredibly hard to stomach. According to veteran Sky News journalist Martin Brunt, who has followed this case relentlessly since the very beginning, the ongoing funding essentially just sustains a small handful of officers to take periodic trips over to Portugal. And what exactly does a taxpayer-funded investigative trip look like all these years later? Astonishingly, there have been photographs published in the press showing British police officers out enjoying a leisurely round of golf at a sun-drenched resort while supposedly on active on-the-ground deployment for the investigation. Imagine the sheer audacity of that optic. You have a multi-million-pound police operation funded by the hard-working British public, and it appears to have devolved into a subsidized golfing retreat under the guise of an active international manhunt. But the true tragedy of Operation Grange isn't just the staggering waste of capital, it is the devastating reality of what that money represents. While 10 Downing Street has continuously rubber-stamped funding for this one specific high-profile case year after year, there are thousands of other families across the country living out their own unimaginable silent nightmares. Thousands of children vanish every single year. These are regular working-class families who are forced to drain their meager life savings just to print out missing posters. They are parents who have to beg local news stations for a mere 30-second segment and who organize their own desperate search parties in the freezing rain because the state refuses to allocate a single extra penny to help them find their kids. This part really makes my blood boil when you realize the horrifying disparity and massive injustice in how the justice system treats different social classes. If you are wealthy, well-connected, and possess the right demographic profile, the government will move mountains, dispatch political operatives, and write blank checks. But if you are a regular working-class parent from a rough neighborhood whose child vanishes in the night, you are entirely on your own. Operation Grange is no longer a symbol of relentless justice. It is a glaring £14 million monument to a two-tiered system where elitism dictates the value of a missing child. And while millions were spent chasing shadows, the cold, hard forensic reality of the case was deliberately ignored. While Operation Grange was pouring millions into dead-end leads, a very different, far more sinister battle was being waged in the courtrooms. To understand the sheer scale of this institutional cover-up, you have to look at what happened to the one man who actually dared to stand up to the British PR machine, Inspector Gonçalo Amaral. As the original lead investigator for the Portuguese police, Amaral was a veteran detective who refused to bow to the overwhelming diplomatic pressure radiating from London. He didn't care about the political optics or the family's carefully sanitized public image. His sole focus was the physical crime scene, the conflicting timelines of the Tapas 7, and the cold, hard facts. When Amaral's investigation started zeroing in on deeply uncomfortable realities that heavily contradicted the narrative of a mysterious stranger snatching a child in the night he was abruptly and unceremoniously removed from the case. But Amaral refused to be silenced. Relying strictly on the official public police files, he published a book detailing his professional conclusions and the investigative steps his team had taken. What followed was a brutal, relentless legal assault. Backed by massive financial resources and a highly sympathetic media apparatus, the McCanns launched a grueling defamation lawsuit against him. Their goal was absolute: to ban his book, drain his finances, and completely obliterate his professional reputation. For years, the British tabloids successfully painted Amaral as an incompetent, vindictive villain, effectively distracting the public from the actual evidence he had uncovered. For over a decade, Amaral's life was a living nightmare of endless litigation. The McCanns weaponized their immense backing, pushing the legal battle through multiple appeals, determined to legally gag him. However, this brings us to the most critical legal update of this entire saga, a monumental landscape-shifting verdict that the mainstream British media has intentionally and consistently downplayed or outright ignored. The McCanns took their crusade to silence Amaral all the way to the highest authority available, the ECHR, and they lost. In a devastating blow to the tightly controlled PR narrative, the ECHR ruled definitively in favor of Inspector Amaral. The court stated unequivocally that Amaral's writings were value judgments based on facts that had already been gathered during the official criminal investigation. and were part of a public debate of high interest. They ruled that his fundamental right to freedom of expression had to be protected. Furthermore, the court noted that any damage to the McCann's reputation was not inherently caused by Amaral's book, but by the very fact that they had been officially named as formal suspects, arguidos by the police back in 2007, the ECHR entirely rejected the McCann's appeal, handing Amaral a resounding legal victory and leaving the McCanns to face significant legal costs and a crushing public defeat. Think about the sheer gravity of what happened here. A massive, heavily funded political and legal machine tried to completely stifle the voice, destroy the career, and strip the honor of a veteran police inspector the very second he touched upon the chilling, unwanted facts of the case. Does this make your blood boil too? Amaral wasn't just spinning wild theories out of malice. His conclusions, validated by the highest court in Europe, were deeply rooted in the actual, undeniable physical evidence gathered in those first few critical weeks. Evidence that the PR machine has spent the last 19 years trying to bury. The horrifying truth is, Inspector Amaral's conclusions weren't based on malice or vindictiveness. They were anchored in cold, hard forensic science. To understand exactly what the British political PR machine was so desperate to bury, we have to strip away the emotional manipulation and look exclusively at the official police files. In August 2007, the investigation brought in the big guns, but they weren't Portuguese. They were elite British specialist dogs deployed by the UK's own authorities. These weren't your average police K9S. Eddie was a world-renowned cadaver dog trained to detect the scent of human death, and Keela was a highly specialized blood detection dog. Their track records were impeccable, having been used by Scotland Yard and the FBI in some of the most complex murder cases in the world. When the handlers brought these dogs into apartment 5A, the results were blood-chilling. Eddie, the cadaver dog, reacted violently, barking and alerting handlers to a very specific area inside the parents' bedroom wardrobe, and again behind the sofa. But the most horrifying alert didn't happen inside the apartment. It happened in the parking lot. The McCanns had rented a silver Renault Scenic to get around. The dogs alerted to the trunk of that vehicle and to the key fob. Now, let this timeline sink in and really process the sheer impossibility of it. The McCanns rented that specific vehicle 25 days after Madeleine vanished. How could the scent of human death and traces of blood find their way into the trunk of a car that wasn't even hired until almost a month after the child disappeared? Forensic teams swabbed the trunk and sent the bodily fluids to a highly secure British laboratory for analysis. The scientific results that came back should have blown the case wide open. The lab found that the DNA profile from the trunk matched 15 out of 19 markers of Madeleine's unique genetic profile. That is a 79% match. However, because the sample was severely degraded and did not provide a 100% complete profile, the forensic scientists had to legally and strictly label the result as inconclusive. This is exactly where the multi-million-pound PR machine executed its most ruthless and brilliant manipulation. They seized the word inconclusive and completely weaponized it. They blasted headlines across the globe, twisting a scientific term that meant not a full 100% profile into a definitive public statement. Of no evidence, they actively gaslit the global public, convincing millions that the dogs were wrong, the Portuguese forensics were a joke, and that there was absolutely zero physical link tying the parents to the scene. But if you apply basic criminal psychology to the alternative theory, the entire kidnapping narrative shatters. The McCanns and their wealthy backers eventually amassed a staggering reward pool, offering up to £2.5 million for information leading to Madeleine's safe return. In the criminal underworld, loyalty does not exist when that kind of generational wealth is on the table. If a human trafficking ring, a local syndicate, or even a random drifter like Christian Bruckner had taken that little girl alive, somebody would have talked. Criminals will sell out their own blood relatives for a fraction of that money. 19 years. 19 years of absolute, deafening silence from the global criminal underworld. No verified ransom demands, no leaks, no credible sightings. That level of prolonged silence doesn't happen when a high-profile hostage is taken alive. It only happens when there is no one left to find. When you finally strip away 19 years of relentless political spin, the high-paid PR spokespeople, and the deafening noise of the tabloid media, what are you actually left with? You are left with the cold, unforgiving reality of the scientific data. We have elite British cadaver dogs alerting to the undeniable scent of death inside an apartment, and inside a rental car that was hired nearly a month after the disappearance. We have a 79% DNA match that was intentionally spun as no evidence by a government-backed PR machine. And we have an unprecedented £2.5 million reward that has failed to produce a single credible whisper from the global criminal underworld. If you look at this purely through the lens of criminal psychology and forensic logic, the probability that Madeleine was abducted alive by a wandering stranger or a highly organized trafficking ring is statistically non-existent. The bitter, devastating truth pointing from the official police files is that she likely never left Praia da Luz alive. This case was never really just about finding a missing child. It rapidly mutated into a multi-million-pound PR industry. It became a sprawling institutional cover-up designed to protect the fragile reputation of the powerful, well-connected middle class. The British government, desperate for a media distraction at the time, built an impenetrable fortress around the parents. They enabled them to refuse to answer 46 fundamental police questions, while simultaneously painting the local Portuguese detectives as incompetent villains. They weaponized the justice system, sued veteran investigators like Gonçalo Amaral for simply stating the facts, and funded a £14 million taxpayer black hole called Operation Grange, just to keep the illusion alive for the cameras. But there is a profound, necessary relief that comes with finally tearing down that illusion. For almost 2 decades, the public has been force-fed a carefully curated lie. Stepping out of that manufactured fog and looking at the raw, unfiltered truth is shocking, yes, but it is also deeply liberating. We don't have to keep pretending that a magical breakthrough is hiding in the German woods with Christian Bruckner. We don't have to keep playing along with a narrative that defies every known law of forensic science and human behavior. Finally, after years of manipulation, acknowledging the cold hard facts is the only way to bring real closure to this circus. It is time to demand actual justice. It is time to permanently shut down Operation Grange. The millions of taxpayer pounds currently being wasted on endless, fruitless trips to Portugal must be immediately reallocated. Imagine the actual good that money could do if it were given to the thousands of desperate working-class families whose children go missing every single year in the UK. Those are families who don't have elite PR teams, who don't get invited to 10 Downing Street for tea, and who desperately need the resources to find children who can still be saved. That is what true, blind justice is supposed to look like. If you believe in breaking through the mainstream media spin and demanding accountability from a deeply flawed system, hit that subscribe button right now. We are building a community here that isn't afraid to look at the darkest, most uncomfortable realities. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief? I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching, and for all the comments, you guys make this worth it.